Hi everyone, my name is Donald Robertson and I want to talk about my most recent book, which is a graphic novel, as you might be able to guess from the cover. It's called Verissimus and its subtitle is The Stoic Philosophy of Marcus Aurelius. I wrote the script and supervised the project, and the artwork was done by an illustrator called Ze Nuno Fraga, who's based in Portugal. And Ze contacted me a number of years ago, and long story short, we were approached by a publisher, and this idea came up, and it evolved into a pretty ambitious project that took around about 2.5 years altogether to complete. It came out about 6 months ago now, and it's been doing pretty well. It was an Amazon editor's pick for best history book, which came as a pleasant surprise. It did very well, especially over Christmas. This is graphic novels, a little bit unlike children's comics. It's they're often aimed more at adults. This book is very much aimed at adults, but to my surprise, a lot of children have been reading it, and there's some pretty heavy philosophy in it, and they seem to have been doing better than I expected with that. So I think it was the artwork. So adults that I know have bought it, and then their kids have seen the book and kind of started flicking through it and got really into it. So you can see it's got a flyer in it for a book my wife edited. I want to talk about just some general stuff and some little bits of trivia. First of all, the cover was originally a sunrise, and then it was changed to a darker, more ominous scene at the request of one of the retailers. It's kind of interesting. I remember the publisher asked me what colour we wanted for the inside of the cover, and I immediately said it has to be imperial purple, right, which has got special significance to Stoicism, and particularly to the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. So this is a hardback book. It is about 250 pages, isn't it? If I remember rightly. It's full colour, and it's a 9-panel format, although we change up the format quite a lot throughout. This is the first graphic novel I've done, and there was a lot of experimentation involved. I did a lot of research on history and philosophy. We had a lot of people helping us. And it's essentially the life story of Marcus Aurelius, based on the Roman histories and a lot of other evidence. So it's one of 3 books in a row that I've written about Marcus Aurelius. The first one was How to Think Like a Roman Emperor, which is a self-help book, and then this, the graphic novel, and then I wrote a prose biography of Marcus Aurelius for Yale University Press. I also edited an edition of the Meditations and wrote a short biography of Marcus for that. And I've written 1 chapter on Marcus Aurelius for an academic anthology as well. So recently I'm also run a course on Marcus Aurelius. So I've been doing a lot of work on Marcus Aurelius. And I've been researching his life for many, many years. And so when we say, I'm kind of hesitating because the amount of research that we put into this is kind of hard to explain. And first of all, I'm just going to show you some bits and pieces now. As we go, I'll maybe tell you more about the work that went into it. So it took about at least twice as long as we expected to finish this, about twice as long as a normal prose book would take. Each chapter, I insisted, had to have a title page with a different kind of mosaic design that complements the content of the chapter, and then there's a quote, a paraphrase from the Meditations that goes with the chapter at the bottom. So I wanted to have something that was kind of like a bit like Gladiator with Russell Crowe, but if you can imagine, with loads more philosophy in it. And we put a lot of time and effort into weaving the philosophy in a number of different ways into the story of Marcus's life. The more I worked on it, the more I realised that Marcus's life story, as it comes down to his histories, is much more epic and action-packed than any Hollywood movie, more than you might realise at first. We have kind of these two, I think of them as 2 parallel streams of information. We've got the external story of Marcus's life as emperor, which comes through three main historical sources: the Historia Augusta, the Historia Romana of Cassius Dio, and Herodian's history of the Roman Empire from the death of Marcus, and then a bunch of other literary sources, bits of archaeological evidence. I'll say more about that. And then we have the Meditations. We also have a cache of private letters that Marcus wrote as well, and some other. We have his legal record, the Roman legal digests, and other bits and pieces of evidence. But we mainly have the Roman histories and then the Meditations. And so one is his external life as an emperor, and the other is his inner life as a philosopher. And the two are kind of normally disconnected, and I wanted to intertwine them. And I did that. I found there are many biographies of Marcus, but it always frustrated me that the biographies of Marcus didn't say enough about his philosophy. I thought it was as strange as if you wrote a biography of St. Augustine or Thomas Aquinas and you didn't mention Christianity. You know, and that's obviously what motivates them, and it's how they think. It's what they think dominates their life. And Marcus was a Stoic. He saw Stoicism as his guiding philosophy. How can you tell the story of his life, his biography, without looking closely at how Stoicism influenced him and why he was drawn to it and so on? So I tried to do that. It requires a little bit of effort. One of the ways we weaved philosophy in, we used a lot of strategies in writing the script. One was to look really closely at the Meditations for any reference, and there are not many historical references in the Meditations, apart from book 1 where he talks about various relationships he has. But we looked very closely for any kind of specific references to anything that could be tied into external events. And so, you know, for instance, if Marcus talks about death, then we imagine that might have been what he was thinking when he was bereaved or when he was confronting his own death and so on. And we scoured the Meditations really closely, looking for things that we could possibly relate. He talks about gladiatorial games, for example, a few times in the Meditations. So we thought, well, let's have him at a gladiatorial match in the Colosseum, and the similar thoughts going through his mind in that context. So to take what's in the Meditations, which seems disconnected from his environment, and look for connections in the text and try and resituate it in those environments in relation to those events. I'll show you some more of the artwork though. I also wanted people to read this and really take away something practical, so I focused on the issue of anger, which is one of the main themes that Marcus talks about in the Meditations. For example, in the Meditations 11:18, Marcus lists 10 separate strategies for coping with anger. Now that should be a clue that he was struggling with anger himself. And in fact, in book 1 of the Meditations, he mentions in passing that he's grateful that he never lost his temper and did something that he regretted, even though he had the character disposition to do so. He had a quick temper. So he admits that he struggled with his temper. And so we use that again as a sort of part of his psychological journey in the story. But the story is very closely based on the evidence that we have from the historical sources. But obviously, if we're going to dramatise it, we have to insert bits of dialogue, we have to fill gaps in the story. But, you know, with that kind of bit of polyfiller here and there and a bit of embellishment here and there, we've nevertheless based it surprisingly closely on what the Roman histories tell us. So the chapter... there are like about 12 chapters, and they cover Marcus's life. And then the last chapter is a different format. It has a series of these full colour splash images that kind of depict his thoughts as he's dying. And they're connected to one key passage in the Meditations where he sums up his philosophy. And so we tied that in with a series of really dramatic images, which we designed in such a way that we thought people might want to print them out and use them as posters even. And then at the end there's a summary of the advice that he gives about anger, actually, to really drive home the practical point. So I think anyone that reads this book is going to come away with the feeling that there's a lot of history, there's a lot of drama in it. There's a lot of relationship drama. There are a lot of epic battles. There's a surprising number of wide shots of sieges and huge battles happening. So good luck if they ever actually try to make this into a movie. We've been talking about whether it could be made perhaps into an animation or a movie. Gladiator 2 is in the works at the moment, and a little bud tells me that the screenwriter who's working on it has read How to Think Like a Roman Emperor. This is almost like a kind of prequel to Gladiator. I didn't realise that until I was towards the end of writing it, and then it suddenly kind of hit me that was how it maybe came across. It was kind of unintentional, actually. We wrote it in a cinematic style, though, just because that was what came naturally to me. And there's a good full colour splash image in one of the pages as well, from a famous scene that has to do with the plague. Yeah, so we crammed in a lot of philosophy. There's a lot of history and a lot of philosophy, and this addressing also the psychological aspects of Stoicism as a form of self-help. I'll just show you a few more epic battle scenes and stuff. There are many quotes from the Meditations itself in here. We got more philosophy in, like using sneaky strategies. Like we imagined that Marcus was attending a lecture on Stoicism, and so what he might have been taught. And so here we have his Stoic teacher telling him a famous passage from Xenophon's Memorabilia, the book that inspired Zeno, the founder of Stoicism. And so we imagine this would be famous to Stoics. And so we retell this famous story called The Choice of Hercules, as an example of something that Marcus might have been learning about in his youth when he was studying Stoic philosophy. And here's some more epic battle scenes. You can see how we switched up the panel format throughout. I wasn't going to just have a kind of boring 9-panel format, but there's a lot of splash pages because Ze's artwork is kind of amazing. It's quite painterly and dramatic. I think it really worked well. We've got some good endorsements as well. Ryan Holiday says Donald Robertson is one of my favourite writers about Stoicism, which is nice of him. He gave us that as an endorsement for this book. Massimo Paolucci says a superb graphic novel that provides stunning insights into one of the most interesting figures of antiquity, as well as into the philosophy that guided him throughout his life. So yeah, it's about Marcus, but it's also about his philosophy. Robin Waterfield, who is a highly prolific classicist, translator of Plato and Xenophon, many books. Robin was kind enough to go through a late version of the manuscript very thoroughly and give us a lot of feedback, in addition to feedback we had from other classicists, experts on Roman military attire, in addition to the research that I did, where I went around and photographed, met hundreds of museum exhibits. I went to Carnuntum, where Marcus was stationed for about a week, I think I spent there. And in Vienna, like shooting video, interviewing the head of archaeology and the CEO of the Carnuntum Museum. I spent a lot of time in Greece. There are scenes set in Greece here as well. So we did a lot of research. We got a lot of advice from experts. We did things like I spent ages scouring Marcus's letters and looking at Roman poetry as well to find phrases and figures of speech in order to try and make the dialogue more appropriate, more natural. That's something that bugs me when the dialogue doesn't sound authentic. So we would look for greetings and oaths and figures of speech, expressions of affection that are found in Marcus's letters and in other Roman literature, and to use those to make the dialogue seem more natural. Robin Waterfield says, whether you're new to Marcus Aurelius or already know him as a friend and guide, this graphic novel will open your eyes. An author and artist have formed a brilliant combination of entertainment and education, which is high praise indeed. Bill Irvine, who wrote A Guide to the Good Life, says Verissimus represents the vanguard of the next phase of the ongoing Stoic Renaissance. John Sellers, the head of the Modern Stoicism organisation, the chair of Modern Stoicism, says, this is a wonderful and engaging introduction to the life and thought of Marcus Aurelius. it's the perfect book for anyone who wants to learn more about the man behind the meditations. Right. So again, it was meant for adults, but we found that adults have bought it and then they've given it to their children as well. It would take a long time to go through the book, but I thought maybe I could talk a little bit about the first chapter. So that kind of helps us avoid too many spoilers. I might spoil the first chapter for you, but not the rest of it. It opens up with a quote on the page I showed you, which says, "Very soon you will be ashes or a skeleton," and then merely a name or not even a name. So we open with a scene of Marcus on his deathbed. I thought that was a good place to begin. That's kind of how we opened How to Think a Roman Emperor as well. Although this is really a very different book, but it actually has a kind of similar structure in that regard, and that there's a framing story that deals with Marcus's death, and then it goes through the story of his life in chronological order. Marcus is kind of right in the opening scene, which is a splash page. He's dying. He's coming to terms with his death, but he's doing it by having thoughts that we also find in the meditations. So we lifted thoughts from the meditations about his own mortality and thought it's reasonable to speculate that may have been what he was thinking as he was lying in his deathbed. We have him talking to Galen, his physician. Get right into the guts of talking about his own mortality and so on. And then we have Commodus and Marcus dying. And this is one of my favourite pages actually, and we show just to show we kind of played around with sort of artistic concepts. You can see the sequence of panels at the bottom fades to black, so we have a black panel in the corner where Marcus dies, and then we have this kind of dream or vision after he's died. It's based on the symbolism of the cult of Mithras, which would have been very familiar to Marcus. And the torchbearers are common symbols in Mithraic shrines, and the reason that they're included is because Marcus's last words seem to reflect the symbolism of the torchbearers and Mithraic temples, possibly. So we thought it would be nice just to use it artistically for that reason. And then we have people mourning his death. And then the next chapter begins with Marcus's childhood, with a wide shot setting the scene, and then we go into the villa where he lives with his mother and his little sister. We basically have the news of his father's death and his early upbringing. And then, like I say, we go through his childhood, and then before long, in the first act, as it were, and then before long we get into this various battles and wars and the diplomacy that he has to deal with that culminates in the civil war with Avidius Cassius. So I'll maybe show you, there's a cool splash page here. That's Marcus when he's elderly addressing the legions about 5 years before he died, close to the end of the book. So that is Verissimus. It's available from everywhere they sell books, as my publisher likes to say. There's actually an ebook version of it you can get as well. It's already being translated into Brazilian Portuguese, and hopefully some other languages will follow. How to Think a Roman Emperor has been translated into nearly 20 languages now. In fact, there's even some I didn't know it was in Chinese, but probably it's in Chinese. So it's been translated into more languages than I'd realised. So please check it out. If you've already read the book, please leave a review. There's about 200 people have reviewed it on Amazon now, and it's got 4.8 stars. So especially with a project like this, it's a big experiment. We weren't sure how people were going to respond, but it's got enough reviews now that we can see the average is 4.8 stars. So people definitely liked it. So we just wanted confirmation that we were kind of on the right track with it, and we weren't crazy. People might actually enjoy reading something like this, and it looks like they definitely do. So we've got a lot of reviews on Goodreads as well. you might want to check those out. Greg Sadler did a pretty cool video reviewing it too. So please take a look at it, check it out, let me know what you think of it. And, if you enjoy it, please post a review on Goodreads or Amazon to let other people who might be interested know more about it. So thanks very much for your time and stay stoic.